The letter arrived on a Tuesday, and Levi Calloway read it standing right there at the post office counter, not even bothering to step aside for the other men waiting behind him. He read it twice. Then he folded it along its worn crease and tucked it into his breast pocket without a word to anyone. Postmaster Greer watched him go, and later that evening, he told 3 different people what he'd seen cross Levi Calloway's face in that moment. Something between a jaw setting hard as flint and eyes going dull, the way they do when a man has already prepared himself for disappointment and still finds it stings. The letter was from the Whitmore Domestic Placement Agency out of St. Louis. It read, in part, that Miss Clara Hughes, the young woman whose correspondence Levi had maintained for the better part of 4 months, and for whose train passage he had advanced $22.50, had entered into a marriage of her own choosing the previous October, and therefore would not be arriving in Harlan Creek, Wyoming, in the spring as contracted. The agency regretted the inconvenience. The agency wished him every success in his continued search. The agency offered no refund. Levi drove his wagon home through bare cottonwood country and didn't say a word the whole 8 miles. The sky was white and low, the kind of sky that couldn't decide whether it meant snow or just cold misery, and the horse, a brown mare named Clover, picked her way along the frozen ruts without any guidance from him. His daughter was waiting on the porch steps when he pulled in. She was 4 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and a knit cap pulled sideways over her ears, the way it always went after 10 minutes on her head. Her name was Nora. She held up a piece of tin she'd found somewhere. "Papa," she said, "I found treasure." He climbed down from the wagon and crouched in front of her and looked at the bent piece of tin like it was worth examining. "You did," he said. "Put it in the barn so it doesn't get lost." She ran off to do exactly that. He stood up and looked at the dark cabin and the bare yard and the cold that was already working through his coat. Spring was 6 weeks away. He had a 4-year-old, 32 head of cattle, and no one to help him mind either. He went inside and built up the fire and started thinking about what to do next. The Whitmore agency wrote back faster than he expected. 13 days after his reply, a second letter came. This one apologetic in a different way, almost rushed. They had a woman, it said, a widow, 31 years of age, recently of Kansas, no children of her own, experienced in domestic management and some light farm work. She was not, the letter was careful to note, what he had originally requested. She was not young and untested. She had already lived a life. But she was willing, capable, and able to depart within the fortnight if he wished to proceed. Her name was Ivy Marsh. There was a single line from her included at the bottom, written in a tidy, unhurried hand. It said, "I do not expect comfort. I expect honest work and honest dealing. If that suits you, write back." Levi read that line 4 times. He wrote back the same afternoon. Ivy Marsh stepped off the eastbound train at Harlan Creek on the 23rd of March, carrying 1 trunk and a carpet bag and wearing a gray wool coat that had seen better years. She was not what the agency's letter had made him picture. He wasn't sure what he'd pictured. Something more careful, maybe, more anxious. Most of the mail-order women he'd heard about arrived looking like they were attending their own funeral, all tight mouths and wide eyes. Ivy stepped onto the platform and looked around the way a person looks around when they are taking inventory, not when they are frightened. She found him in about 4 seconds. "Mr. Calloway," she said. It wasn't a question. "Mrs. Marsh," he said. They shook hands. Hers was cold from the journey, and her grip was firm. "I appreciate you writing back," she said. "Some men wouldn't have." "I needed the help," he said. "No point in pride." She almost smiled at that. "Good," she said. "I brought my own bedding. I didn't want to assume." He picked up her trunk. It was heavier than he expected. and he adjusted his grip. "The wagon's out front," he said. "It's about 8 miles. "I know," she said. "I looked at the map." They walked out to the wagon. She climbed up without waiting for him to offer a hand, settled herself on the bench, and tucked her coat around her knees. He got up on the other side and clicked Clover into motion. For a while, neither of them spoke. The country opened up around them, brown hills, gray sky, the smell of cold earth starting to think about thawing. "You said in your letter you have a daughter," Ivy said. "Nora. She's 4. How long since her mother passed?" 2 years in February. Ivy nodded once. "Does she know I'm coming?" "I told her a helper was coming to stay." "A helper," Ivy repeated, not unkindly, just turning the word over. "I didn't know what else to call it," he said. "That's fine," she said. "That's honest." Another mile passed. A hawk turned slow circles above the ridge. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I want to be clear about what I'm offering. I'll cook, I'll keep the house, I'll help with the child. I can mend, I can garden, I can keep accounts if you need it. I'll work hard enough that you won't question whether I'm earning my place." She paused. "What I'm asking for in return is a roof, fair meals, and to be treated like a person with sense. That's the whole of it." He kept his eyes on the road. "That's what I'd give anyone working my land," he said. "Then we'll get along fine," she said. Clover's hooves rang on a frozen patch of mud, and the wagon rattled, and the sky above them was enormous and pale and full of uncertain weather. But something in the cab of that wagon had settled, the way a hinge settles when the pin finally drops into place. Nora was not on the porch this time. She was just inside the door, peering through the gap like a small and very determined spy. When Ivy stepped into the kitchen and set her carpet bag on the floor, Nora's door opened an inch wider. Ivy didn't make a fuss. She didn't crouch down with exaggerated warmth the way some adults did with small children, all high voices and wide arms. She simply turned toward the door and said, "You must be Nora. I'm Ivy. I'm going to be helping your papa for a while." There was a long silence from behind the door. "Do you know how to make biscuits?" Nora asked. "I do," Ivy said. "Do you want to learn?" The door opened fully. Nora was in her stocking feet, her dark braids undone at one end, holding a wooden spoon she'd apparently brought to the confrontation as either weapon or offering. "Papa burns them," Nora said. "Most men do," Ivy said. Levi, standing by the door with Ivy's trunk on his shoulder, said nothing to this, which was probably wise. Ivy asked him to show her the kitchen, the sleeping arrangements, the wood pile, and the water situation, in that order, and she asked each question plainly, like a woman calculating what the work would cost her before she agreed to it. He showed her everything. The cabin was small, a main room with the cook stove and the table, a sleeping alcove at the back where he'd curtained off a space for Nora, his own room past a plank door on the left. There was a loft, accessed by a short ladder, where they'd stored the extra bedding and some of the seed grain. "I can sleep in the loft," Ivy said, looking up at it. "It's cold up there," he said. "I've been cold before," she said, "and it's proper." He didn't argue. He found her an extra quilt and she carried it up herself. That night she made biscuits from the flour she found in the tin by the stove, and she found a ham bone in the cold box and made a pot of soup that smelled like something a person wanted to walk toward. Nora sat at the table and watched her the whole time with the seriousness of someone observing important work. When Levi came in from the barn and sat down and took his first spoonful, he didn't say anything. He just ate steadily and refilled his bowl without asking, because it was his house and he was hungry, and the soup was good. "It's good," he said, eventually. "The ham bone did most of the work," Ivy said. Nora, who had eaten every bite including the parts she usually pushed aside, said to Ivy in a carrying whisper, He doesn't say it's good unless it really is. Ivy looked at Levi. He was studying his bowl. Good to know, she said. She was up before him the next morning. He heard the stove when he woke, the soft iron clank of the firebox door, and he lay still for a moment listening to someone else taking care of his house. It was a strange thing. It made something in his chest go quiet that had been tight for a long time. By the end of the first week, certain things had been established without discussion. Ivy ran the kitchen without being told how. She mended the tear in Nora's coat that he'd been meaning to get to since January. She found that the water barrel had a slow leak and told him about it directly, without drama, and they fixed it together on Wednesday afternoon, him holding the barrel and her packing the crack with the tar compound she'd found in the lean-to. You've done this before, he said. On a farm in Kansas, she said. My husband and I had 80 acres. Wheat, mostly. He didn't ask what happened. She didn't volunteer it. He could piece together enough. Kansas, wheat, a widow at 31. That country had a way of taking things from people. On Friday, Nora fell asleep at the table after supper, with her head on her arms, and without saying anything to each other, Levi and Ivy both moved to take care of it. He lifted Nora and carried her to her alcove. Ivy turned back the blanket. He tucked her in. When he came back to the table, Ivy was washing the bowls, and neither of them mentioned that they'd moved in the same direction without planning to. He sat down and looked at the fire. She likes you, he said. She's easy to like, Ivy said. She doesn't take to people easily, he said. She didn't let the neighbor's wife touch her for 3 months. Ivy was quiet for a moment, her hands in the wash water. She's not cautious because she's difficult, she said. She's cautious because she lost something and she doesn't want to lose again. He didn't answer, because that was exactly right, and he recognized it, and it applied to more than one person in the room. He got up and put another log on the fire and went to bed. He didn't sleep for a while. What he hadn't told Ivy, when he described the situation in his letter, was that the Harlan Creek Land and Improvement Company had been sending men out to the smaller ranches along the creek for the past 4 months. Not threatening, not yet, just measuring, just talking about water rights and grazing easements in the friendly way that means they've already decided something and are letting you get used to the idea. Levi's 32 acres sat at a bend in the creek that the company very much wanted access to, because whoever controlled that bend could control the water flow to the 3 ranches downstream, and those 3 ranches were already in negotiation with a cattle syndicate out of Cheyenne. It was the kind of situation where a man alone on a small parcel was the easiest sort of problem to solve. Men alone had no witnesses and fewer allies. He'd known this was coming all winter. He hadn't known what to do about it. On the second Saturday of April, 2 men rode up the lane while Ivy was hanging laundry on the line and Nora was playing in the dirt near the porch steps. Levi came out of the barn and met them before they could get to the house. The men were polite. They represented Mr. Aldous Crane, they said, of the Harlan Creek Land and Improvement Company. They understood he'd received an earlier letter about the creek access easement. They were just here to see whether he'd given it any thought. Levi said he'd given it thought, and the answer was no. The men exchanged a look that said they'd expected that and had a plan for it. One of them said that the company was prepared to be generous. The other one looked past Levi toward the house, the way men look when they're calculating what a person has to lose. Ivy was watching from the clothesline. She'd stopped moving. Nora had stopped playing. "Gentlemen," Levi said, in a voice that wasn't loud, "you've delivered your message. You can go." They went, but the way they went told him this wasn't finished. He walked back toward the house. Ivy was still standing by the line, a shirt half pinned and her hands still. "How many times have they come?" she asked. "That's the third," he said. "Do you have the deed recorded in Laramie?" He stopped. "I do. Do you have a copy here?" "Yes." "Good," she said. She went back to pinning the shirt. Because if they start claiming otherwise, you'll need to prove what you have. He looked at her. She pinned the shirt, smoothed it flat, reached for the next piece. My husband's farm in Kansas, she said. A water company came for that too. Her voice was even. He didn't fight them. I've thought about that a long time. Levi understood what she was not quite saying. He turned and went back to the barn to finish his work, but something had shifted in his thinking. Not about the company, but about her. About what she'd brought here beyond her carpet bag and her bedding and her good common sense. She'd brought a reason to hold on. The company's next move came in May, and it came through a lawyer instead of riders, which was almost more alarming. A letter arrived claiming that Levi's original land purchase in 1887 had contained a provision for creek access rights that the company was now exercising. The letter was written in a way that sounded lawful and final, the way things sound when someone wants you to give up before you think it through. Levi brought the letter inside and set it on the table. Ivy was teaching Nora her letters at the other end of the table. They'd been doing this every morning for 2 weeks, Nora sitting up very straight and serious, drawing letters in the soft side of a flour sack with a piece of charred stick. Ivy picked up the letter. She read it without expression. Then she read it again. "This is not a legal document," she said. "It's a letter. It says provision, but it doesn't cite any instrument number or recording date. That means either they haven't found what they're looking for, or the provision doesn't exist." "How do you know that?" he asked. "I read every document that touched my husband's farm," she said. "After the fact, when it was too late, I learned what I should have known before." She set the letter down. "You need to go to Laramie with your deed and ask the county recorder to pull the original filing. If there's no easement on record, this letter is nothing." He nodded slowly. "I'd have to go for 2 days at least." She met his eyes. "I can manage Nora and the stock for 2 days." He knew she could. That wasn't the hesitation. The hesitation was something older and harder. The instinct of a man who'd been alone so long he'd forgotten how to let someone take a turn. "All right," he said. He left on Monday before light. He said goodbye to Nora the night before, because she was asleep when he went out, and he told Ivy that the mare Clover would need her left front shoe checked before the week was out, and Ivy said she'd see to it. He was back on Wednesday evening to find the lamp lit and supper made and Nora asleep already, and Ivy at the table with his deed papers spread out in front of her and a list written in her careful hand. "What's this?" he said. "Everything in those papers that mentions water rights," she said. "I read all of them while you were gone. There is no easement, no provision, nothing. Whatever that lawyer put in his letter, it doesn't exist on paper." He sat down heavily. He'd found the same thing in Laramie. The county recorder had confirmed it, and Levi had gotten a written statement to that effect. He pulled it from his coat and set it on the table next to her list. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. "Good," she said. He looked at the two things side by side, her careful list, his official paper, and something moved in him that was not quite gratitude and not quite relief, and was very much something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Like standing in a room he'd thought was empty and finding out it wasn't. "Ivy," he said. She looked up. He had not planned what came next. He had spent most of the return ride not planning it, which was almost the same thing. "This arrangement we have," he said. She waited. "I'd like to change it," he said. "Not the work, it works. What we're doing works." He stopped. He was not a man who fumbled with words usually. I'd like it to be something more settled than a helper staying for wages." The lamp between them threw its small light. Outside, the Wyoming night was deep and cold-edged still, though it was May and the creek was running high. "More settled," she repeated. "I'd like you to stay," he said. Not because I need someone to cook and keep the house. Though you do that and you do it well." He looked at the table. I'd like you to stay as my wife, if that's something you'd want." The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when a person is deciding something real. "Levi," she said, and it was the first time she'd used his given name, and it landed differently than he expected. "I came here because I needed a roof and work I understood. I told myself that was all." "I know," he said. "But I stopped telling myself that about a month ago," she said. He looked up. "Nora called me the right one," Ivy said quietly. 3 weeks passed. When I was braiding her hair and she didn't know I could hear her, she was talking to herself the way she does, and she said, "Papa got the right one this time." Ivy's voice did not break, but it came close. "I've been thinking about that ever since." Levi didn't speak for a moment. He thought about his daughter, serious as a small judge in all things, who did not give her trust like it was cheap. "She's not wrong," he said. Ivy pressed her lips together for a moment. Then she nodded, once, slow. "All right," she said. "Yes, I'll stay as your wife." He reached across the table. He covered her hand with his. Her hand was warm now. She'd been inside all evening. No cold train platform, no frozen wagon seat, just lamplight and the smell of supper, and his deed papers, and her careful list. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "I'm getting a fair deal out of this, too." He almost smiled. He thought probably she was right. They were married 3 weeks later by Reverend Tilson in the Harlan Creek Church, which was a plain room with 6 pews and a lot of light coming through the south windows on a Saturday in late May. Nora stood between them in new boots Levi had gotten her from the general store, the first new pair she'd had since she outgrew her last ones in December, and she held Ivy's hand through the whole ceremony with both of hers, in the grip of someone who means it. Ivy wore her gray wool coat because it was what she had, but she'd found a bit of ribbon somewhere, a pale green, and pinned it at her collar. Levi noticed. He didn't say anything until later, when they were walking back out into the sunlight with Nora between them, and he said quietly, "The ribbon suits you." She turned slightly pink, which he had not seen on her before and found he liked. Nora tugged their joined hands. "Can we have cake?" "Yes," Ivy said. "We don't have cake," Levi said. "The deacon's wife said she'd bring one," Ivy said, which was news to him, and which meant that Ivy had been making arrangements with the congregation in the quiet way she arranged most things, thoroughly and without announcement. The deacon's wife brought the cake. It had white icing and was slightly lopsided, and Nora ate 2 pieces and fell asleep on the wagon ride home with her head against Ivy's arm. That evening, after Nora was in bed, Levi came in from checking the cattle and found that Ivy had built up the fire and moved the second chair, the spare one that had lived in the corner since Ruth died, the one he'd never pulled up to the fire because sitting across from an empty chair was its own kind of grief, and placed it beside his own. He stood in the doorway and looked at the 2 chairs sitting together before the fire. She was at the stove. She spoke without turning around. "I found a board in the lean-to," she said. "Good plank. If you have time this week, I thought you might build a shelf above the window for Nora's things. She's running out of room in the alcove." "I'll do it Saturday," he said. He went and sat in his chair. The fire was good and warm. After a moment, Ivy came and sat in the chair beside him, and they were quiet together, the way 2 people are quiet when they no longer need to explain themselves to each other. Outside, the creek ran full, and the night was settling, and the long fight with the land company had lost its power, because they had their papers and their proof, and they had each other, and that last part was worth more than they had words for yet. There is a kind of love that does not come as lightning. It comes the way spring comes to that high country, slowly, underneath, before you see it in the green. You go to sleep in the cold and you wake up and something has changed. And you cannot say exactly when it happened, but there it is, undeniable, warm at the root. Levi and Ivy Calloway built their life from honest acts and plain speech and a little girl's certain wisdom. The land company sent no more letters after the county recorder's statement made its way to the right people in Laramie. The shelf got built on a Saturday in June, and Nora arranged her small treasures on it. A piece of tin, a smooth stone, a ribbon Ivy had given her, with the gravity of someone furnishing something important. You never know how a life will find its shape. Sometimes the agency sends the wrong woman, and she turns out to be the right one all along. A widow with worn luggage and a firm handshake and the good sense to move a chair. If that story speaks to something in you tonight, leave a comment below and tell us. Do you think Nora knew from that very first day? We'd love to read your thoughts, and if you'd like more stories of courage, kindness, and the lives people built in that old frontier country, please subscribe and come back. There's always another journey worth taking. Good night. God bless you and yours, and may you always find the courage to move the empty chair.